All right. I'm totally fascinated with Lencioni's books, right? Like Good to Great and all those things. And he has a newer one out called The Ideal Team Player, which I think applies to sales entirely. And so what he does is he breaks it down. He's got this great story, and I'm totally intrigued by it about a construction company. But they narrowed it down to three things that an ideal team player is and what you're looking for hiring. And I thought we should share this based on, like you're always looking for what you'd be looking for in a salesperson. I think it applies directly. So the three things that they look for overlapping, which I think number one is huge problem for salespeople sometimes, but a humble team player. So they should be humble. Number two is hungry. I think that applies directly. Absolutely, when a
Mhm.
salesperson is hungry. And the third one wasn't quite so obvious to me, but it's smart. I'm like, well, duh, I don't want somebody that's dumb. But what they're talking about, somebody that's more like EQ smart, like
Mhm.
understand when they're making people mad, or they don't understand like that they're not being friendly, or those kind of behavior parts. And so I've really started applying this to some of the folks that I've dealt with where I'm like, they just weren't a great fit. Why? And when I ran them through that filter of like hungry, smart, and humble, I'm like, oh, they were missing like hungry. Well, there's the problem. So I was
Mhm.
curious, what do you guys think?
I think hungry. I think the two ones that I've run into the most is it because I do think we filter out pretty well for humble in our hiring process. It's sometimes hard to filter out the hungry in particular, and sometimes the smart. Like I remember talking on back in Dallas, talking about how I had a gut feeling about a guy on our team that like it just felt like he wasn't connecting with people.
Right.
And like in my mind, I'm like, I can fix him. That was my inexperienced sales manager talking a decade ago or so. But I couldn't fix him. That's who he was as a human being. That was his personality. And thinking that I could fix his personality and make him connect and learn how to connect with more people wasn't going to work. So like that was an example where that was a very expensive lesson. But hungry is probably the biggest issue I run across. They just that is you can usually find those where like through the interview process, but and even when you set expectations of like, look, you got to set first meetings, you got to get out and network, you got to do cold calls, like whatever you got to do, you got to get out there. And your value to us as a hunter in particular is first meetings, and getting a hunter that's just hungry, that's self-driven, self-motivated, goal-oriented, all those things is probably one of the hardest to filter out in the interview process for me.
All right, Brad, what's technical perspective on this?
I think they're good broad brushes. Like the challenge I have with them, and I think Nate, you started to allude it to a bit, is uh like hungry in my mind is driven. Like
Yeah.
because there's times when you're hungry and there's times when you're not hungry, but you can still do what you want to do even though you don't feel like it. Like and it's a slight kind of different nuance on the whole thing. Same thing with smart. It's like the great part about the parable is it tells a good story, right? Like you can immediately enter in and see exactly what they're talking about. The
Yeah.
challenge I have with those parable kind of books are they're in a vacuum that just never exists, right?
Right.
It's never quite that clean. And smart takes a while to kind of manifest itself, right? And the sales example would be there isn't it's hard to tell on the surface the difference between a talker and a closer
Oh
until
yeah.
until they have enough at bats, right? And then you're not quite sure. And I think it's sort of the same thing with smart. Like until you have some situations where there's some anomalies, you don't really know how smart they are, right? So I love the concept, but and you certainly want to look for when you're doing your hiring, but it's not quite as clean as it comes across in those books.
Which
That's my
unfortunately is the reality with hiring salespeople. Is some of it
yeah,
is gut, no matter how much we try to
Hmm.
bundle it.
yeah,
Like closing, I think if you ask Nate and I, like I can feel a salesperson that can close pretty quickly.
yeah,
Like I have a pretty good understanding of what to look for, at least the leading indicators. To your point, like you don't always
yeah,
know,
right,
but I can always like the
yeah,
ones that talk way too much with no direction. I'm like my radar's all going off on that thing all over the
yeah,
place. I can see Nate nodding.
yeah,
So yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Part of me wonders if one of the things that he was trying to address was some of those nuances in his Working Genius book.
Oh yeah.
Because the Working Genius book is like different ways that you could be smart. Right? Like it's
It definitely
all
speaks
different
to that. Yeah.
manifestations. Because if you're not aware that you need all of those different things, smart's in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where I feel like, back to a sales example I can think of. There was we'd worked with one of our peers pretty closely, and they had a salesperson that was absolutely just killed it. Like, he was amazing. He was driven, but they ended up parting ways because he didn't have the right balance of all three characteristics, right? He would piss people off internally. He just went over the top, and he just basically created chaos inside of the organization. So because he wasn't humble and he wasn't smart, he was sure hungry, but like,
Right.
you know what I mean? So he did top perform, but created chaos, and it ended up not being a good fit long term. So I think it's for me, all of that is, and no one's a perfectly rounded, or in that example, triangulated person of those three traits, but it's trying to find the right balance that really contributes to the role and versus detracting from your cohesiveness of how you function in the organization.
Right.
All right. So smart, hungry, they're easy to dismiss, right?
Yeah.
So with that, we'll leave you humbly with our next nugget.